Thank you so much to all of you for joining the session today, and thanks to Equal Engineers for hosting the session. So my name is Rob Braun, and probably the first thing I should say is that I'm not an engineer. I'm an astrophysicist, sort of an astrophysicist in the sense that a long time ago I did a degree in astrophysics at Newcastle University, but I knew I never wanted to be an academic. So I ended up working in telecoms for many years, in both technical and commercial roles. And then about 10 years ago, I moved into the field of digital health, just as that was emerging. And then I co-founded Braided just over 5 years ago. Now, at Braided, we set out to solve one impossible problem, and then kind of by accident, we solved two. We set out to solve one impossible problem and came up with a really, what we think is an elegant, simple, and certainly innovative and non-obvious solution to that problem. We then realized that the thing we'd invented could also solve an impossible problem here on Earth too. And that second one is one that may impact many of you on this webinar. So you may find it beneficial, which obviously is the reason that I was asked to deliver this presentation. So the second part of my story is probably going to be most relevant to your day-to-day lives, but I'm hoping you'll find the first part interesting. Oh, some background noise suddenly. Hoping you'll find the first part interesting, so I'm going to share some of that story with you as well. So I'm just trying to move my slides forward and they're not moving. Bear with me 1 second. That's better. So the first impossible problem that we solved is related to space travel. And it's the problem of time delay or signal latency in deep space communication. So most of you on here being engineers, I'm sure you'll be aware that communication with people in space relies on radio. And the radio waves are electromagnetic waves. So they're just like light. They travel at the speed of light, and that is the fastest possible speed in the universe. But it's not infinitely fast. And the distances in space are vast. They are so vast that even with the radio signals traveling at the speed of light, delays are going to occur on communication. Now, this isn't a problem today with people on the International Space Station because the International Space Station is so close, just a few hundred kilometers away. One of the things I like to say, being a Newcastle University graduate, is here near London, where I live. When the space station goes over my head near London, it's closer than Newcastle. So very easy to communicate. But it will be a problem when we go back to the moon in a few years' time. The delay when we get to the moon is going to be about 1.5 seconds each way for communication. That's what the Apollo astronauts experienced back in the 60s and 70s. Now, it doesn't sound much, but actually even that small delay causes a lot of problems. And when we consider a possible trip to Mars, things are going to get much, much more challenging because Mars is much, much further away. So the delay when and if humans make it that far, it's going to actually vary all the time because Earth and Mars travel around the sun in different orbits. So the distance always varies, but the delay is going to be measured in minutes, not seconds. Right now, I looked it up just before this presentation. Right now, Mars is so far away that a radio wave between Mars and Earth takes 12 minutes to travel. So if I were on Mars delivering this presentation, you wouldn't even have heard me say hello yet. The photons carrying that statement would still be winging their way across the void from Mars to Earth. Now, this latency is going to cause huge problems in future space missions. The reason being that human beings have evolved in a zero latency environment. So our brains are essentially hardwired to expect communication to have no latency. So even latencies of a fraction of a second, such as those we sometimes experience on Zoom calls, they can be a challenge. With latencies of many minutes, the chaos is going to be enormous. So just to give you an example or illustration, imagine for a second that you're a crew member on a ship to Mars, and you've asked Mission Control 3 questions in relatively quick succession. Mission Control is going to eventually send you 3 answers, but because of the delay, the answer to question 1 is only going to be received after you've asked question 3. And your brain will naturally assume that the first answer you hear is the answer to the question you just asked, which was question 3. So unpicking this and working out which answer belongs to which question is actually really hard work. It gets officially described in the space sector as sort of a significant additional cognitive load. Now, of course, most astronauts are pretty smart people, and they can work this out, but all the extra thinking takes time, it diverts them from other tasks, and they may well end up making a mistake. So it's a very big operational challenge for future missions. In addition to the operational problems, this delay is going to cause significant psychological stress too. So our evolutionary history has led us all to expect zero latency in communications, for emotional communications as well. The communication with friends and family that's so important. It's going to keep future crews happy and healthy, but if they can't communicate, it's not able to do that. Imagine you're a crew member on the first mission to Mars. It's definitely the most exciting and also the scariest thing you're ever going to do in your life. And you really want to talk about that with the important people in your life, but you can't. It causes big problems. So it turns out that Elton John was right in the song Rocket Man when he sung that it's lonely out in space. Now, from a physics and engineering point of view, all of this is really very obvious. So it's caused by a basic law of physics. Nothing can travel faster than light. So it's been known about since well before the first space flights. And because it's caused by that basic law of physics, everyone in the space sector just assumed it was an impossible problem and couldn't be solved. So when we came along with a solution, we really shocked a lot of people. Now, there are a whole lot of other stories, by the way, that I could share with you one day if anyone's interested on the side of that, about how we as a small British startup somehow managed to blag our way into a conference that was full of NASA administrators, NASA mission controllers, astronauts, flight surgeons, and we told them we'd solve this problem. It wasn't easy to go through that journey, but it was a lot of fun. And we did eventually get to the point where we were part of a NASA-funded study looking at whether our idea, our invention, could actually solve this problem. So we're actually insanely proud of the fact that our first income came from NASA. And as far as we know, we're the only British company that can say that. The study we did, by the way, is now finished and published. And the short answer is yes, braiding does work. It does solve this problem. So I'm now absolutely convinced that when the first humans blast off to Mars in maybe 20, 25 years' time, they will be using braided technology because nothing else can do what we can do. So what did we actually invent to solve this problem? Well, when I get to this stage of these presentations, first thing I have to say is that sadly, we didn't find a way to break the laws of physics. If we did, I'd probably be giving a very different presentation, maybe from a very different place. But what we did do was we invented a method of communication instead that can disguise the latency. So we can't remove it, but we can disguise it. It's a method of communication that makes it feel to two people separated by millions of kilometers that they're having a natural synchronous dialogue. Now, at this point, I'm going to show you how it works. But at this point, some of you, I think, probably won't get it, which is not surprising because it really is unlike anything you've seen before, even though it's relatively simple. Some of you will get it, and many of you will go, really? Is that it? I was expecting something much more exciting. And the short answer is, well, yes, this really is it. It's a simple but a non-obvious idea. But the simple ideas are sometimes, in fact, almost always the best. What you can see on the screen in front of you is a recording of a demo session that my co-founder and I did when we pretended that I was on the first mission to Mars, and I'm about 2/3 of the way to Mars. So at that stage, I'm about 90 million kilometers from Earth. And the time delay is about 5 minutes. Everything I send will take 5 minutes to reach Earth, and everything my friend sends will take 5 minutes to reach me. So mission controllers kindly allocated me a slot for some personal comms, and I've decided to have a catch up with my buddy Drew. Now, if I just pick up the phone and call Drew, it's going to take 5 minutes before his phone rings, and it's going to take another 5 minutes before I hear him say hello. So you can't just do this on the fly. You kind of pre-schedule these sessions. So we pre-scheduled this session a day or so ahead of time. We agreed the initial topics we wanted to chat about. We decided on 6 topics, and you can see the shape of a carousel there, which has actually got 6 sides. So each side carries a chat window. The chat windows, or the sides, we call them braids, and this chat window is going to rotate in virtual space between us, carrying the braids with it. So let me just press play on the video here and show you what happens. I hope that's working. Yes, it is. So you can see I'm typing in the bottom there. I'm typing in a window called Planning for Landing. You can also see on the left-hand side a visual indication of 2 previous braids that I typed in. The content there has already left the ship and begun its journey to Earth, but it hasn't yet reached Earth, so it isn't being read on Earth. the carousel is rotating at a pre-agreed cadence, and the timer bar across the top is showing me how long I've got left in this braid. Not long. So you'll see in a second when it gets to the end that the carousel rotates one step. When it does that, the content that I've just created is then going to be transmitted. So it's going to begin its 5-minute journey to Earth. And at the same instant, on Earth, it rotated for Drew as well. And the content he just typed on a different braid has begun its 5-minute journey to me. And you saw as the carousel rotated, you see that I now have a new message from Drew. Now, he started writing that message 7.5 minutes ago. He finished writing it 5 minutes ago. And since then, it's been traveling to me on the ship to Mars. But to me, it feels like a fresh message that I've just received from Drew, as if he's in the next room. So I start my reply. The video stopped now. I've stopped the video just a short snippet, but you can see I started my reply. When the carousel rotates again, the next content's going to begin its journey to Earth, and I'm going to get another message from Drew. That happens every time the carousel rotates for me and for him. So from this point onwards, it's feeling to both of us like we're having a natural, real-time discussion despite the latency. So as I said, it's super simple. It sounds simple. It sounds trivial even, but if you actually experience it, you actually realize it's extraordinarily powerful. And as I said, there's been a study, a NASA-funded study. There's been a couple of others, actually, European Space Agency and UK Space Agency, that have all shown that this works, solves a whole host of operational problems because questions and answers on each topic are all held together in the same braid. So you don't have the confusion and the need to apply brain power to actually try to remember. And also, really importantly, it supports meaningful communication with friends and family. Feels to me like Drew's just on the other side of the carousel, like we're having a real connection. Now, this is where it starts to come back to earth. One of the most interesting things about braiding is why it works. Not the how it works, but why it works. Why do human beings struggle to communicate where there's latency? And how does braiding fix that? So it's something that I think you're all hopefully going to find interesting and potentially useful. So if any of you have ever studied any psychology, you may have heard of the concept of co-presence. Co-presence is a concept that's required for effective, meaningful kind of two-way communication. It's the feeling you get when you're sat on the sofa with a good friend, as you see there. I've just had an alert of some sort about meeting summary, so I'm just going to say got it. Don't know what it's doing. So yeah, the feeling you get when you're sat on the sofa with a good friend, as you can see here, and the conversation just flows. So co-presence, from a psychological point of view, is enabled by synchrony. And really importantly, synchrony doesn't necessarily mean at the same time. The most important aspect of synchrony is with a shared rhythm and a shared focus of attention. That really is important. So I'm going to say it again. So co-presence is required for effective communication. It's enabled by synchrony. And kind of from a psychological point of view, that doesn't necessarily mean at the same time. Instead, really importantly, it means with a shared rhythm and a shared focus of attention. So that's the underlying psychological method through which braiding works. If you think about the deep space scenario again, communication delay destroys interpersonal synchrony. What we invented with space braiding is something that recreates interpersonal synchrony in deep space and enables co-presence. So that's why space braiding is so powerful and how it can disguise the latency. Essentially, what we've invented is high latency synchrony. So even though there's a time delay, the participants feel like they're co-present. And in the example I just showed, it was like me and my co-founder Drew, as if we were in the same conversation together. So that's how it works in deep space. Now, on Earth, there's no latency, but there are loads of situations where you want co-presence and effective communication, and it doesn't always happen. So this situation you can see on the screen is, I'm sure, familiar to many of you from having had to attend work meetings. I've been in countless work meetings over my career, and I'm sure this chimes with many of you that you know in many meetings that some people talk almost non-stop and others don't. It's not because those quiet individuals don't have any great ideas. It's because they don't feel co-present, even though they are co-located. So they're effectively excluded from the meeting. Now, this can happen for many, many reasons. For example, if someone like me is the only old person in a room full of young people, if I'm the only man in a room full of women, if I'm the only person for whom English might not be my first language, or if I'm the only introvert in a room full of extroverts. There are loads of reasons why people struggle to feel co-present in meetings and struggle to contribute. Another one of those, and highly relevant, of course, to today, is neurodivergent. If you are someone who is neurodivergent, you may not feel that you can engage in the same way as other people, and of course, that's highly relevant to the audience we have today. Now, Braided was actually created by a neurodiverse founding team. My co-founder Drew, who sadly since had to leave the business for health reasons, he is autistic. He's also one of the most introverted people that you would ever meet. As you can probably tell, I'm not introverted, I'm extroverted. A few years ago, I would have told you all that I was neurotypical because I thought I was. Since going on this journey, I've discovered that very clearly I'm not. I actually very clearly have ADD. Only found that out a few years ago, but it explains an awful lot. An extrovert ADD and an introverted autistic person have very different communication preferences. So Drew and I often struggle to communicate. We somehow managed to communicate together, but when we came up with braiding, that helped a lot. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, one of my favorite phrases is, great minds do not think alike. Without the different ways of thinking that Drew and I had, we would never have built Braided. We'd never have invented space braiding. We would never have invented braided meetings. But it did cause us communication challenges. And because we have those different communication challenges in meetings, it was really tough. For me, a typical meeting is kind of unplanned, and it's like, hey, let's have a chat. And my brain will fizz around, taking us off on loads of different tangents. And some of them just might be helpful. Most of them are not. For Drew, a good meeting would need to be well planned, a clear agenda, good preparation, no surprises, no interruptions, and for him that was a big challenge, was the way I communicated, and for me a big challenge was the way he communicated. It was when we started to use space braiding that we realized it was creating an environment that allowed both of us to communicate effectively. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how we've adapted space braiding to create what we now call braided meetings, which is the same technology applied on Earth and creating meetings so that you can actually create co-presence for groups of people and allow meetings to be much, much more inclusive as well as much, much more effective. So because there's no latency, you can create a similar carousel. You can see one here. This particular carousel's got 5 sides instead of the 6 that we saw before. And because there's no latency, you don't just have 2 participants, one on either side. You can have lots of people. You can have up to as many people as you've chosen to have braids in the meeting. So what happens in a braided meeting, I'll show you, this is another video I'll show you in a second. But what happens is you're creating an environment which is highly inclusive and allowing everyone to contribute. So all the people who previously sat in meetings in silence, but probably they're frustrated thinking I had the answer, but nobody asked me or nobody allowed me to contribute, suddenly all their good ideas can come through, and the meeting output overall is much, much more effective. What we've got is braided meetings that I'm going to show you here. We also have a sister product called Braided Interviews, which is the same thing, but optimized for neuro-inclusive recruitment interviews. As I'm sure many of you know, the recruitment process can be really challenging for many people. And sadly, many people will self-select out of applying for a job that they could do really, really well because they know they're going to struggle with the face-to-face interview. Using a braided interview instead, the interviewer can challenge the interviewee in the same way in a real-time environment, but in an environment that is highly inclusive and therefore an environment in which more people can thrive. So let me just press play and show you this brief video. Where we find the play button again, there it is. So this is a screen, as I said, showing 5 braids, this particular meeting is a marketing meeting where the owners of the gym are planning a relaunch. So you can see this braid is about posters and leaflets. Al and Jules have already shared their views, and now the person whose screen you are watching happens to be called Tina. She's adding her thoughts. You can see the same timer bar as we had on the space version, and the carousel is going to rotate in the same way. It rotates at the same time for everybody. And when it rotated, it took Tina's views on posters and leaflets, along with those already added by Al and Jules before, around the corner to the person sat on Tina's virtual left, which happened to be Simi. So Simi is now adding her thoughts on posters and leaflets. And you can see that Tina now has a new braid, which is radio advertising. You'll see here, Simi actually started on this braid. Then it went round to Al. Al added his views, and then Jules added his views, and now Tina is sharing hers as well. So whilst Tina's giving her view on this braid, all of the other participants are currently active in different braids. That's a really important point. In a braided meeting, everybody is contributing all the time. So as well as being highly inclusive, a braided meeting is an amazingly efficient use of time as well. And because it's so efficient, most braided meetings end up being just 20 or 30 minutes long, and you end up with more output than you would in an hour and a half or a 2-hour session. Now you can see that the timer bar is still going across the top. I'm just going to zoom this forward a little bit because I want to show you onto the next. Let's get to the next end of this one. It's like about there, so you can just see it rotate one more time and begin to understand the way this process is working. So now it's rotated again. Tina is now on the PR braid, and you can see actually at the top it says "you said." So Tina started on PR. So, for example, essentially she would have been leading the PR work stream. She shared her views. You can see it's been around to all of her colleagues. They've each had the time and the space to add their thoughts. And now Tina is able to add her kind of additional views based on what her colleagues have shared. Now, just to answer an obvious question, you can, of course, vary the number of braids. You can vary the time of the meeting. You can vary the speed of the rotation. All of that is entirely flexible. So that is braided meetings. Just like space braiding, it's very, very simple, but non-obvious. So the first time you use it, and I hope you all will, you'll probably find it a little bit odd. But the second time you use it, in general, you'll find it very, very interesting and very, very valuable. So let me just go on to this. So, yeah. So I just want to talk very briefly here about the benefits and use cases. And this is kind of an interesting part of it because one of the things I love saying about braiding is it really is like nothing else on Earth, which is not surprising because it was originally designed for use in space. But the benefits it delivers are extraordinary and can be applied in lots and lots of different meetings. I think from a neurodiversity point of view, the first two there are probably the most important. So there's no audio and there's no video. So for people who worry about the challenges of perhaps of eye contact or worrying about the way they're perceived, all of that is not there in a braided meeting. The other one, second one, no interruptions, no interrupting. And if you remember the example I shared about my co-founder Drew and I, Drew really struggled with being interrupted. One of my many weaknesses is I interrupt too much. So with those two classic challenges, it was never easy to make progress. For Drew in a braided meeting, he could never be interrupted, so that was great. For me, because I could never interrupt, not only did I not interrupt, but actually I found my own personal contributions were more effective because instead of spending my time waiting for someone else to draw a breath for me to jump in, I was actually thinking more about the topic I should be thinking of and adding better value. A couple of other examples of here, it's an equal opportunity for everyone, so you never get loud voices dominating. Everyone gets a fair and equal chance. The agenda is at the top of the braid, so you never lose agenda. You never go off topic. Again, one of my weaknesses. And you're always going to finish on time. So there's a lot of benefits from a neuroinclusivity, a broader inclusivity, and an efficiency point of view. And actually what we find is on average, braided meetings are 8 times more effective than other formats. There are many more benefits. I'm happy to talk about these with anyone who wants to know more details, but those are kind of the headline ones. And in terms of use cases, what we found is that many meetings, not all, but many meetings can benefit from a braided section or even being replaced entirely with braiding. So everything from one-to-ones, you can see daily stand-ups is something that seems to be quite a compelling use case. People use it for innovation sessions and project meetings, etc. The list of meetings that it could be used for is almost endless. What we do when we roll this out with new customers is we spend time working with people, get them to share their list of future meetings, and we talk with them about which ones might benefit from braiding. The way people do this is actually quite interesting. What's emerged is people don't start a braided meeting on its own and go straight into it. Typically, they would start in Zoom or Teams for the kind of, hey, how was your weekend? And quick session, quick explanation session. We're here to talk about the marketing for the gym launch or whatever. And then you go into the braided section. And then maybe after that, come back to the Zoom section to conclude and make plans for next weekend. So that's pretty much all I wanted to share in the presentation now. Obviously, I'm very, very happy to answer any questions. What you can see on there, a couple of QR codes. I would love you guys to all give this a go. I think you'll all find it super interesting. I think you'll all find it super weird, particularly at first. But if any of you want to sign up for a free trial, you can with that QR code there. It'll take you straight into the trial sign up. Don't need a credit card or anything. You just try it for a month for free, no problem at all. If anyone wants more detail, you can book an appointment actually with me directly on that particular link there. If you do sign up for the free trial, your QR code there, which you can grab that on your phone. When you join a braided meeting, when you set one up and join one, please do it on your laptop rather than on your phone, because as you've seen, it's all written. So you need a reasonable size screen to see the content, and you do need to be able to type easily as well. So that was all I wanted to share. I hope to the team from Equal Engineers, thank you again for asking me to deliver this presentation. I hope that was enough. I hope that wasn't too spacey for everybody. I hope it had some relevance, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. I can see hands raised, but I don't know how to handle that. So I don't know if any. So shall I just take them in the order they come up? I guess I should. So the first one I think is Martin has come up with a question. So Martin, do you want to go ahead and ask your question, please?
Just thanks again for speaking to us, Rob. It's been brilliant. I had a brainwave while you were talking. Could you do braided images?
Great question.
Could lots of us are visual learners or visual?
Yes.
Visually, that might be a way forward as well.
Really, really good question. It's on the roadmap. It's not there yet. This is an evolving product. We're a small company. So absolutely, the idea is that over time, one of the braids or more of the braids could have an image that could then be annotated, or a drawing or a whiteboard or whatever. And on the space side, in fact, one of the things we talked about is that astronauts might have their children draw pictures and then draw them together or something. So it will come. It's not there yet. Thank you. I think there was a second question, but it's gone off my screen, so I need to try and work out who it was now. Let me see if I can find out who it was. I think from memory it was someone called Samyak, but I can't. Oh, the hand's gone down now, I think.
Hear me? Hello.
Yes.
I'll turn my video on. Hi, good evening. Thank you, Rob. Really good presentation.
Thank you.
Please forgive my shabby surroundings. Two things to ask if that's okay. First of all, with regard to the braided meetings, I think it's a really interesting idea. But I wonder, do you not lose a little bit of the personality and a bit of the sort of animation of people's thoughts and words by putting it all into text and audio format? Is there a way to make it neuro-inclusive, which is really important, but also not losing some of the more elemental parts of communication?
So great point, Samyak. The answer to that is yes and no, right? So the no part is actually you're getting more, because in many meetings, many people say nothing anyway. So if someone's saying nothing, you're not going to get anything from them at all. So this is an opportunity to include everybody and get more contributions from people. The reason people have begun to adapt this kind of blended approach, starting on, say, Zoom and then moving on to braided, is exactly for that. So I talked about my co-founder, as I said, Drew is autistic. He really would struggle with like all the small talk and the business, but he would still do it. He would still want to do it. He would still want to engage with the people, partly because he realized how important it is for them, partly because it was important for him as well. But he would find much more opportunity to contribute meaningfully during the braided session. So by having a blended session, you are getting the best of both worlds, essentially. And if you don't have a braided session there, then actually, I challenge you to do this. I don't know what meetings you might be in, but the next meeting you're in, what you said there, just reflect on it and think, okay, for maybe 2 or 3 other people, that was exactly what happened. For maybe 2 or 3 other people, maybe that wasn't. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to be inclusive. I guess the second thing linked to that, this is sort of a personal reflection I've had for some time, is that we're getting very technological in society these days, and we'll come across this term of zero latency communication, whether that was what you said, but latency in communication is a really kind of interesting concept. And I think that for the past several hundred years now, we've had that to some degree, maybe not internet, but certainly, you know, telephones and, you know, radiographs and being able to transmit messages, you know, far further away than in person. And I don't know whether that's helpful in terms of, you know, providing, you know, a route for human advancement and the sharing of ideas, but I think all of this is a little bit depersonalizing in a way. And I think that we seem to really hold concepts such as efficiency and output in high regard. But again, going back to what I was saying earlier, I do feel like in a way it is eroding a bit of who we are. And, you know, should there not be a return to the person and the in-person community?
Yeah, it's a very broad question, obviously, and I don't think it's necessarily one that I'm qualified to answer, if you like. But certainly, you know, there's a lot in what you say about us as human beings. We are in an environment, in a situation where we have to kind of essentially those of us who are working have to work, you know, have to be efficient, have to try to create output. That is part of the way of the world. Shouldn't be the only thing. I mean, I'm sure it's not the only thing you do. I'm sure you don't work 24/7. I certainly don't. And so I think there are certainly things about the work situation that are not what we all essentially evolved for. However, they are what we're all doing. And if we can make it more inclusive, more effective as we do that, then that's, I think, is hopefully a good thing. I mean, I talked about braiding being 8 times more efficient. You know, I remember in my corporate career being sat in all-day workshops where the output was essentially 0. And so then you go and do it all again a week later. And it's complete and utter frustrating waste of time. At least if you're getting the output, you can move on. So that, other than that, I'm not sure how much I can add to that, because it's a great question, but I don't think I'm qualified to answer any further.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks, Samyak. And I can see there's a question from Stephanie now.
Hi, I was just thinking, I work in a hybrid capacity, and actually this might be useful with regards to actually getting stuff done. I honestly find that I've got ADHD and Asperger's, so I'm kind of a mix of both. And I find that going into the office is very good for team meetings where you're trying to bounce in an idea off other people for interpersonal things. But when you're actually getting down to doing work, I find the office environment is actually quite distracting. And these are noise cancelling headphones that have been provided by work, because I find some days if I've had to go into the office but I've got to get work done, I sit in a room on my own and I don't really interact with anyone, because otherwise I wouldn't get that work done. So I find it's I know a lot of people are pushing to get back into the office because they feel a lot of ideas are going to get bounced off each other, but I'm worried that actually this hybrid working is working a lot better for me. And this sort of braiding where you can kind of keep adding ideas but not have to necessarily think straight away, because the way my brain processes things, it sometimes takes a couple of minutes for me to think about it and think about my response, so it kind of would give me the time to think for it to go round again, rather than having to constantly have an automatic response, which can sometimes be stressful and actually make my mind go blank.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in fact, there's I don't want to go too deeply into psychological theory because, as I said, I'm an astrophysicist, not a psychologist. Drew, my co-founder, was a psychotherapist and a psychologist by training. And what he talked about when we were developing this was there's things called system 1 and system 2 thinking, and your emotional immediate reaction is not necessarily the most effective. And I think some of those things are embedded in some of what you're talking about. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, this could certainly help. In some cases for some sections. What we have found as we've talked through this is, you know, there are some people for whom being in a meeting is something that's hugely energizing, hugely positive, but they don't realize how other people are struggling. And so you have to find alternatives that sometimes work for some people and sometimes work for others. So yeah, applying this to some of your meetings could well work. I'm sure you're already doing it. It's still going to be helpful to be in the office sometimes. But if you're in a hybrid environment and if there's a chance to work more effectively in different ways, you should explore that. So hopefully you'll sign up and give it a go because you may find it super valuable. I can see there's something in the chat. I'm just going to see if that's a question. Someone said, someone called, so there's a message saying brain technology may remove the double empathy problem regarding autistic folk, and there's a link there. So I think that's, rather than a question, that's a suggestion. So no worries. Cool. Any other questions from anybody? No. Oh, yes, there was one. Samyak, hello again.
Sorry to keep jumping in. I had one last question, if that's okay, Rob.
Go for it.
You were talking about, this is now going into space. You were talking about the fact that the carousels have to have predetermined sort of arrangements between the two parties that are communicating. But in a space environment, do you have to pre-agree on the sort of modality of the carousel? Because if someone is out in the field, perhaps, and they change location or you change location, how are you going to be able to synchronize in a dynamic sort of setting?
Yeah, good question. Yes, everything's pre-agreed. So in the space one, the example I gave where I'm 5 minutes away on the way to Mars, if I was having a session with you, you can't, after the session started, you can't say, oh, can we just add another braid because it takes 5 minutes for that to reach me. So it's simply impossible. Thinking this stuff through is really interesting because we've all evolved in this zero latency environment. People, even astronauts, have said to me things, and then afterwards they go, no, I get it now. I can't do that because you just can't think in that way. Same thing in braided meetings. We've taken all those design features. You could do different things on Earth because there isn't any latency. But what we've done is we've followed some of those design principles because we've realized that that's what creates this concept of synchrony and co-presence. So if you and I and a couple of other people on this call are having a braided meeting tomorrow, we pre-agree the time and the duration, etc. Once we press go on that meeting, it will then run and it will finish on time. After you start, if you're the host of a meeting, you've got very, very limited tools. The only thing you can do is let the meeting continue or stop the meeting if it's not working for some reason. If something's happened, there's nothing else that you can do, and that's a deliberate design decision. Once you've started it, you have to run with what you've got. Takes therefore a little bit of thinking about really important things like, who do I need in this meeting? And just as importantly, and to me, I think this is one of the biggest benefits, who do I not need in this meeting? Because if there's a meeting going on that you're running and you invite me because I always come to those meetings on a Thursday, but I don't know anything about this meeting, then you're wasting my time and I'm wasting yours when I start talking because I don't know what the subject is. So you do that little bit of thinking, you plan in advance, and with a little bit of planning, your meetings tend to be more effective. Does that make sense?
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. We've got time for more questions if there are any. I saw Mark suddenly appear, so I don't know, Mark, if you're about to say something then.
No, I'm in a coffee shop and my crisp microphone filter isn't working, so apologies, background noise. Just wanted to say thank you, Rob, for giving up your time and joining us. You and I met last year at the UK Space Conference in Belfast. I was about to say Belgium there. Belfast when I facilitated that talk on neuroinclusion. And I think it's fascinating what you're doing. Like there's so many different areas in which it can be applied. So I hope this has been recorded. It'll be on the website. So I hope this is helping get the word out about your startup and can help plant some seeds for you to then nurture and grow. And it'll be so good to watch your business evolve over the coming years. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm really glad we were able to give you this platform.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Really enjoyed it. And to everyone who attended, thank you for taking the time to join us. Please do either sign up for a trial or book a demo. The more users we have at this stage, the better. We're learning every time someone engages with us. It's fantastic. And the more we can learn, the better we can make this for everyone over time. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, I realise our regular chair hasn't been here actually, facilitator, sorry. So if there are any other questions, we do have it till 6, but otherwise, yeah, I think we're good. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rob. I'll be in touch. We'll speak soon, yes. But
Take care. Thanks a lot.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.